All right, time for another edition of Our House DIY. This time it's a live show. It's not going to be a Q&A, even though I will answer a couple of questions here and there from Super Chat. I, as always, am your host, David Lee Roth. So, to start this one out, what I'm going to do is a build along. It's going to be a pallet sign, and I'm going to show you some of the techniques that I use to decorate our pallet signs. I don't know how everybody else is doing them, but these are some of the ways that I've come up with to get some of the images and the lettering and the fonts and even flowers, things like that, onto the board. I've got one video where I show you sort of a mock-up camo technique. I'm not going to be doing that. I've just prepared this board. I just put it together real quick. I didn't even bother cutting the sides down even. I literally just put this together just a few hours ago. But what I did was I took the board and put 3 of them together, put some supports on the back, glued it and nailed it in place to hold them all together. Excuse me. Painted this white and then went back and gave it kind of a quick sanding. Now if you look at this board, I'll get it in here close, you can see the detail that kind of pops out in this board. You can see these swoops and these curves and all that stuff. Those are a result of a saw. When they're cut in the sawmill, it's just a rough cut, and those are kerf marks from the kerfs on the saw. So not all pallet boards are created equal. Sometimes you find some boards that they may look like they have a little bit of color and patina and distress to them, but then as far as indentions and sort of the 3D portion of it is really plain. And then other times you find boards that they look nice and crisp and clean and new, but then they'll have a lot of these characteristics in it. Honestly, if it comes down to it, I would rather have this type of stuff in it to add more character. You can always stain or color or paint or even leave the board sitting out in the rain and the sun so that the weather can kind of distress them. But anyway, what I wanted to do was have this set up so that then I can come in and show you a few of the techniques that I use to get images and lettering on the board. The first one that I want to show you so that it can kind of set up and be drying is a decoupage technique. Now, I know there's probably a lot of you out there in the DIY craft world that are familiar with decoupage and you know exactly what it is. But for those of you that don't, decoupage is basically the act of applying Mod Podge or something like that to a surface and then taking either a photo or a piece of paper that you've cut out. You can use flowers, you can use fake flowers, real flowers, anything like that that you want to apply to that board and attach it to that board. So you put a layer of Mod Podge on, or in this case I'm going to be using Elmer's glue. You put a layer of that on, you lay whatever it is, your photo, your cutout, your napkin, whatever it is you might be wanting to put on the board, you lay that in the glue, then you lay another layer of Mod Podge over that, and then that seals it in and it's then attached to the board. It's almost like a photo transfer. So, let me grab my glue real fast. My daughter stole my glue. We have to share glue in this house. Anyway, Mod Podge is the mainstream thing that people use to decoupage onto their boards. But if you're looking for something a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier, Elmer's glue does the same thing. It's a lot like puzzle glue. They're all in the same family. The puzzle glue, the Elmer's glue, the Mod Podge, it's all the same stuff. So really it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So to start, what I'll do is I'm going to just kind of lay this out. Now I'll show you, I've got a picture to go on the board here. So here's what I'm going for. I'm going to try and get this image onto this board and leave some space for another sort of, it's going to be a different kind of transfer, but I'm going to have a font going across here that has a word or a phrase on it, and that's what you would use to attach it. So that's what's going to go on the board. So I'm going to try and do this upside down a little bit. And so I know basically the size of what I'm doing, so I want to apply this and I'm just going to squeeze it out. You can do it any way you want. You can put it out into a bowl if you want to do that. You can squirt it out of here. You could take the top out and pour it and let it run everywhere. I'm just going to squirt the glue all over the area, and I'm going to be fairly liberal with it. You don't want to skimp on it. And I'll tell you another thing is, when you are decoupaging something like paper onto a board, the thinner the paper, the more air bubbles you're going to have underneath it. And if you start seeing a lot of air bubbles, now I'm just going to take a simple brush, and I've got all this all over the board. I'm just going to try and spread it out. It's real simple. But the thinner the paper you use, the more air bubbles and pockets you're going to get underneath it. And they may not pop up immediately, instantly, as soon as you see them. It may take a minute or two for them to pop up, and then you'll be sitting there looking at it going, oh my God, it's destroyed. I've got bubbles all in my project. But as it dries, a lot of those bubbles will start to come back out. Basically what's happening is you're wetting the paper. And when you wet the paper, it's stretching. And when it stretches on the board, you're going to see that you get, and see, I'm just putting that on there. I'm just pasting it on there. That's a great picture. I love that. Anyway, so don't worry too much about the bubbles. You're going to try and smooth them out as much as you can. And I'll tell you, the easiest thing to do is just kind of take your brush and just kind of go along it. Now, I don't have a lot of glue on this brush. That's fine. What I'm trying to do right now is just kind of push it down and smooth it out a little bit. And I don't care if it's straight. Normally you'd want to measure this, kind of make you a few little marks here and there, reference points, so that you're squaring it up and you're putting it exactly where you want it, and it's not kicked off to one side or the other. But I'm basically just kind of flattening this out right now. And if you look at this pallet board from the angle that I'm looking at it, it's got a lot of undulations on the board. When you have that, it becomes a little bit more difficult to get things to lay down. So if you've got a smoother surface, you can actually take like a credit card or a debit card and kind of squeegee across it a little bit. You don't want to scrape too hard, because remember, this paper is getting wet when you put it on the glue. So anyway, that's the first layer. And before that even sets up, I'm going to put some more glue on top of it. Now, this is going to be the layer of glue that kind of seals it all in. It's not only going to keep the paper from pulling back up off of the board later on, but it's also going to help seal it in and protect it. And it's just like puzzle glue. If you ever use puzzle glue, it's the same concept. So, and again, I'm just going back over this again, and I'm just trying to brush it out smooth, brush out any air bubbles I see. If you have some that are really just kind of being a pain, you could actually take a needle or a pen of some kind, pop the air bubble and try and push it back down maybe. If you're using photo paper, the photo paper will not get nearly as many air bubbles in it as like a thin paper, like this is just regular printer paper, right? So in any event, that's that. So it's a little bit faint, but that's kind of the way I intended this to be. I went through and modified this, and I did all this from my cell phone. Okay, so you don't have to have a laptop or crazy programs and all that. Your phone has tons of apps on it. So I did this on my phone, and it's just a simple program that I use called Snapseed, and it's got a lot of great tools and things in it to be able to crop, to change it to black and white, to tweak the colors on it, to tweak the structure on it. You can, like what I did was I did a reverse vignette instead of a dark outer circle that kind of fades into the normal color of the middle. What I did was I did a white vignette and just faded it out. Since I've got a basically white board here, that's kind of helping it fade off into the background a little bit. I wanted it to be subtle, almost like a watermark, And that picture right there, that's totally subtle. Okay, so that's got to dry. While that dries, and it really won't take long, After all, it is just Elmer's glue. While that dries, I'm going to try and show you my next technique. Now, you can just put the picture on the board and you could take up the entire board with it and that would look great. And again, this is going to be up to you what you're wanting to do with it, but these are just some of the things that are going to be common amongst people trying to decorate pallets. It's either going to be, hey, we're going to put a cute word or cute phrase or something like that on, or a quote or the family name, or something like that. Or it's going to be, hey, I'd really like to have our family's picture on a piece of wood. That's a hot thing. And you can pay a lot of money for that stuff to be done, or you can do this technique and it's really cheap. So what I'm trying to do is a combination, and I'm not necessarily trying to make this look like a great board, but I want to be able to show you the different techniques. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to get lettering on it. Now there's a couple of different ways, and I've done some different things. Now one of the things you can do that's really easy, and honestly it would probably save you some time and some effort, is just to simply design your font. Write out what you need on your computer or on your phone or however it is that you're typing something out. Type it out, get it in the font, get it in the color you want, get it the size you want, and then print it out on your computer like I did with this photo. Cut it out and then decoupage the lettering onto the boards. You could do that, and that's totally effective. The issue that I've run into with that is that when you start getting into a lot more scripty fonts that have thinner profiles to the letter itself, to where you're getting into just one pen stroke line instead of a wide bold line, those things get really hard to cut out. And if you're doing a white piece of paper on a totally white board, you might just get by with kind of cutting around it and then just letting that white paper that's in the background behind the letters just kind of fade off into your board. But if you have something other than that, you're going to have to cut each and every letter out individually. Oh, everybody says it's buffering. Okay, well, I'll try and slow down a little bit. Maybe it's because I'm moving around too much. Anyway, where was I? The lettering. You could try and cut each individual letter out and decoupage it on there. Again, I've tried that. I've done it in the past. If you have one letter that's like a real scripty big letter that you don't want to have to draw out and paint and all that, that might work. That might be a good alternative for you. But the other thing that I've tried is just going through and freehanding something. I'll go through and I'll draw something out, like to sketch it with a pencil. I'll look at a picture of it and I'll try and sketch it out. If you're doing like a team logo, or if you're doing something like that, it becomes really difficult to try and keep proportions and all that in place. So unless you're, a serious artist, which most of us aren't, you're going to have a hard time with that one. Another way to do it is to get an opaque projector. If you remember ever being in school and the teacher would have the opaque projector up there, she'd lay out a transparency or something on there. It would shine up into the head of it and it'd go back behind her on the wall, and it would take whatever was this big and blow it up to this big. You can do that also. Again, that requires some equipment, mainly the opaque projector, that you may or may not be able to afford or get access to or be that good at using. You may not have the space for it. You have to have a really dark room. So again, that one's not foolproof. But the thing that I have right now that is foolproof, that will really help you out, and I've done a video on this. I've got a palette sign or two, some videos posted on my channel that show you how to do this. What I use is carbon paper. And you can get carbon paper at office supply stores, any kind of art supply, office supply, anything like that. It's simple. It's what you use basically to put an image or a word or something onto it. You trace it out, and then it transfers onto whatever you're trying to get the image or the lettering onto. So normally I do all kinds of family names, and we'll do cute sayings and whatever my wife might come up with. But today, since it's me, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to transfer this nice font onto this board. I think it's going to work well, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really simple. All right, and we're done with the decoupage. So again, I'm trying to wait on this to dry because this needs to lay on top of that. So, you know, maybe I can cut the excess off. 1 second. Alright. So, I'm going to try and cut the excess off of the bottom of this. All I'm using this sheet of paper for is to give me something to trace. Alright? I just went in a program on my computer. I use Microsoft Photo Draw. It's a really old dinosaur of a program, but it works great. Anyway, I just went on my computer. I typed this out. I picked a font. I made it the size that I wanted it to be, and I hit print. It came out of my printer just like this. Now, it doesn't matter what color this comes out in. It doesn't matter if it is pixeled out or looks like it's faded or whatever. Again, all you're doing is tracing this. This is not what's actually going on the board. I print it out in black because it makes it easier. It's just black on white. That's the easiest thing in the world to see. So what I'm going to do is lay this on the board kind of where I want it. Alright? And then I'm just going to take a little bit of tape. It can be Scotch tape, it can be masking tape like I have, it can be any kind of tape just to hold it in place. And you don't want to tape it all around. You don't want to use a whole lot. You just need, you know, 2 or 3 little pieces of tape. That's it. Just to make sure that it's staying where it's supposed to be. Just like that. I'm not even putting any tape at the top. It's just along the sides and the bottom. Now I'm going to take my carbon paper, and you got a dark side, which is actually the carbon, and you got a light side, which is, you know, the paper that holds the carbon. Now I'm going to put it dark side down right underneath what it is that I want to trace. So again, you can see there it is. And then I'm just going to take an ink pen. You can use an ink pen, you can use a pencil. Demetra 43, yes, I tried lowering the resolution and it still won't play. Ugh. I'm really sorry some of you guys aren't seeing this. I'm not seeing any drop frames or anything like that. I'm still running at 30 frames per second. I guess maybe you'll have to go watch the video after it posts onto the channel. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but in any event, I'll press on. So I've got the carbon paper underneath the regular paper. I'm just going to use an ink pen, a regular ink pen, a pencil. Even if it doesn't write, it's fine. You just want to trace out your letters. Now, you want to be fairly, I don't know what the word is, fairly precise, I guess, with where you're tracing, because this is a white board, and whereas this is not actually going to be the tracing that you do is not actually going to be what's on the board that you're looking at. You're going to cover it up. Still, if you go outside the lines a little bit, then you're putting carbon, which is a charcoal or a black color, onto a white board. And if you don't cover that, you can't really, I mean, you can try to erase it. It may or may not work, but it's probably going to leave a blemish on your board. So wherever you're tracing this carbon, you're placing that carbon onto that board. So if you go outside the lines and you get real sloppy with it, then you're going to see that carbon showing up on your white board. So I'm not going to trace this whole thing. I'm going to trace one letter. You get it. Alright? Now I've traced that whole letter. Now it doesn't look different. Alright? Then I'm just going to skip forward. Let's pretend we traced out the entire thing. I lay that aside. I pull the carbon paper off. And now, if you can see that, exactly what I traced is on that board. It transferred what was on that paper exactly as I traced it onto this board. So now I have an outline. Now the next phase, which is actually the last thing, is you choose a color, you use a paint marker. Now I picked black for this because, you know, again, I'm not looking to make, you know, an award-winning board here. Yeah, we do have, that's right, Lee. There's a tornado warning and all that going on, so we've got like the worst weather in the world going on outside. It's pouring down rain, so that may be why. It may be my signal. But in any event, I chose black. It stands out from white. I'm not trying to win any awards. I just want you to be able to see what I'm doing. But these are paint markers. They're not regular markers. You could use regular markers. You could use crayons at this point. You could use a paintbrush and paint if you wanted to. I mean, that's really trying to use some skill. And what I'm trying to do in it is eliminate skill and keep it cheap so that anybody can do it. So I'm going to take one of these paint markers. And if you've never used paint markers before, I'll tell you a little bit about paint markers. It's just like a can of spray paint, whereas they have a ball bearing inside. You can hear that. See? And you shake that up, and that shakes the paint inside and mixes it. Then when you pull the cap off, you can see that this one is already black. But they start out with a white tip, having no color. Every paint marker you get is going to have no color on the tip. But then when you want to start painting the first time, you depress that tip. It's a spring-loaded tip. You just push it down a few times to prime it. And then the paint, you'll see the color start to run into that white felt tip just like a marker. Then you're pulling paint. And you can just color in between the lines with it. So I'm going to try and do this while I'm holding it up. This may not be the easiest thing in the world. And you can get different size tips. You can get large tips. You can get small, tiny little pointy tips that will direct the paint into the right place. You know, you don't, and occasionally you have to push down to kind of get a little bit more paint to come out. And that's okay. It gets tricky when you start doing letters that have really thin marks, when they have really thin spaces. When you start trying to work in those really thin spaces, you'll really learn the value of a thin, fine point paint marker. And then the inverse is also true. When you're trying to go through and paint a large area, you'll be glad that you have one of these big fat ones. Now Sharpie makes a version of these. They work well. The other one I have is Craft Smart, and those are the two that I have. I've seen other brands of them, and honestly I've got all kinds of different brands of all kinds of different paint markers. Now the other thing I was going to tell you is I do have a plain paint marker, an empty cartridge paint marker, so that if I want a custom color and I can't find the color that I want, I can actually mix my own paint, and I think it's just acrylic paint, and I can put it into that marker, and bam, you get your own custom paint. They sell those as well. I'm not sure where you guys are, but here at Hobby Lobby is a good place for stuff like that. There's another place called Michael's that has a lot of stuff like that as well. There is AC Moore. It's another good craft place. And then you'll have local art shops, you know. My cousin Eric, who is on here now watching, used to work for Commons Art Shops. That's not around here in North Carolina, but in any event. So I'm just going through, and again, I don't want to do this entire thing because it's not like I'm going to take this board and hang it on the wall. But I just wanted to kind of show you what it looks like when you go through and paint it. And the other thing about black that I like is that you can find a black ink pen. And if you have some areas that are really tight, fine points that you need to get into that you can't quite get into with your paint marker without going outside the lines, you can take a black ink pen. And you can see I've got that done there. Alright. And then if you've got some areas that, you know, need a little bit more touch up and all that stuff, you can go along and actually trace the edge of that with your black pen and get some really sharp corners and tighten things up with the black ink pen. Now of course you could do that with other colors and all that stuff, but you'd have to have an ink pen that matches that color, and that's going to be really hard to find in some cases. You can also do that with a very fine point Sharpie marker that's not actually a paint marker but just a regular permanent Sharpie marker. They make really fine points in those also. Now you also notice on this decoupage that the colors kind of milk out. Let's see if I can get the glare off of it. The colors kind of milk out on that a little bit when you put glue over the top of it. As that glue dries and sets, the colors will come back a little bit, but it will fade it out just a little bit. So whatever you want to have as an end result, you want to probably print it out a little bit darker than what you actually want, because it will lighten up. But once this dries and that glue sets, it'll be protected. The color will come back, and you'll see that it turns out, a lot like what the original picture was that you put on there. So, and there's the F from, my letters. So that is really how I do pallet signs. It's also a good technique for like cornhole boards. I've got a cornhole board video up that you can go check out. It's a good technique for that too. And then of course you go over the whole thing with lacquer or polyacrylic or whatever to be able to seal it all in and protect it. But other than that, one other thing you can do is once this glue is all dry down here on this picture, you can take a piece of sandpaper. I don't know if you'd want to use a palm sander. It may be just a little bit too aggressive, but you can take some sandpaper and you can actually go back and sand the edges down to kind of fade it out in there, make it look kind of like an old pirate treasure map or something like that, so that it just gives you a whole different effect. I'm really sorry you guys aren't able to see because this is buffering. Oh man, I hate that. We've got a bad storm going on. It may be something with the servers, who knows. I'm not a tech geek. One more thing I wanted to tell you about your pallet signs. This is there's lots of people that know about this trick, but it's helpful. If you have soda cans, okay, and they've got the pop tops on them, you can break those pop tops off, turn your board around to the back, and again, I just took 2 boards and cut them to know I did not measure anything on this. I didn't try and make it perfect, and I didn't measure the distance between the 2 or make sure these were centered up or any of that stuff. But you could take those soda tabs and attach them using little nails or little screws to the back here, and then bend it out just a little bit away from the board, and that gives you hooks, free cheap hooks out of the trash that'll be on the back of here that you can use to hang that on the wall with a couple of nails. You could also put a little board across here and just do one in the middle if you wanted to do that. But I always try and recommend that you have 2 points of contact for stability anytime you hang anything. But that's another little good trick for pallet signs. To paint this board, these were really blonde boards. I don't know if you can see this or not on here, but the color on that's really light. Now, I'm going to grab another sign real fast that I have, and I'm going to show you the difference here. Just see how this looks. Alright, so this is another sign that we made. And I'm trying to set these up here together. Alright, you can see in this sign all these striations going down, and there's such a difference between the raw wood and the painted wood. And then when you go back over and lightly sand this, you expose all this stuff and you get all this character out of this board. I mean, it really looks great, not only because of the saw marks, but because of the color of the board underneath. When you go through and you paint boards that are lighter in color and then you sand it down, you just don't see that same contrast in between the white and the color behind the board, and it really makes it pop. It really makes a difference. So if I was doing this and I was trying to make this a real sign, the first thing I would have done is go through and maybe use some stain and try and stain these boards a little bit darker, or I would have gone through and sprayed some kind of a dark brown paint on it and sanded that off to darken the boards underneath, because when you go back and you remove that white, that's what's going to show. And I don't spray these with heavy white because I know I'm going to be going back and sanding them down. In that instance, I do use a palm sander. It makes it go really quick, but again, I'm not aggressive with it. I'm not trying to push down on it too hard. So again, I think that the character in this sign is head and shoulders above the one we just did. And if this was about making an actual sign that you were going to try and recreate, then I would have gone through and darkened the boards underneath first. So if any of you can still see this in the stream, I know the stream's been messing up, and you have any questions about that, feel free to shoot those to me. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have about it, but I hope that maybe I've given you a pretty in-depth explanation and look into the ways that I go about making pallet signs. Pallet signs, a lot of people are not making them anymore just because they're so predominant, and you can find them cheap everywhere. But you can't find custom pallet signs just anywhere. You have to actually have somebody make those for you. Anybody can go out to Hobby Lobby or Walmart or Target now and find pallet signs that say love or family or whatever on it. But it's really hard to go out and find one that says, the Jenkins family established 1984. Somebody's going to have to make that for you. And if you're going to pay somebody to do that, I can't imagine somebody charging a lot of money for it. But why not try doing it yourself? This is a really easy project. This is really something that anybody can do. You don't have to have any special skills. And again, I'm taking the skill out of it. I'm making this like foolproof. It's so easy. You don't have to draw anything. You don't have to have any knowledge of how to use a paintbrush. You don't have to know, how to print out good photo quality stuff and have this crazy laser printer and have all this expensive equipment and everything like that. All you got to do is take your phone, find the picture you want to print out, and print it from your phone if you have a wireless printer, or email it to somebody who can print it out for you. Size it up, do it the way you want, cut it out, and then glue it on the board, brush it out, put some more glue on it, brush it out again, and bam, there's your family's picture on a pallet sign. I know a lot of you say, well, yeah, that's all great, and I know how to decorate this stuff. What about how to actually make an old pallet into a sign? Well, that sounds like a step that most people would skip, but that's actually a vital part of the process. When you are, first of all, looking for pallets to use, don't just go and grab any pallet. Because they take up a lot of space, they're heavy, you have to store them, and then you have to break them down to get the boards loose. Don't just bring home dead weight that's not going to yield you a really good product. Look at the pallet and say, okay, these boards are pretty sound first of all. Are they all kind of splintering apart like they're going to fall apart because when you go to try and take them off of the 2x4 skids that they're on, you're going to be applying pressure to it. Are they going to withstand that kind of pressure and come off that board? So that's number one. You got to have some kind of structural integrity with the boards themselves. Number two, look for thickness in the boards. Are they going to be super thin? Because if they're super thin and you go to pry them off, you might just snap them. So look for something that's a little bit more considerable. Another thing to think about is the type of wood. And I know not all of you are going to be wood experts, and I'm no wood expert, but I can tell the difference between oak and pine. And oak is definitely better to use than pine. Another thing, look at the kerf marks. Look for that character. Look for that 3D effect in the wood itself. You don't want it to be these smooth cut boards, because when you go to paint those and then sand it back off, you're going to be removing all that material or none of that material, and it's not going to give you the character that's in this board. You're going to be very disappointed with the product that you produce. So definitely try and find ones with some sort of three-dimensional character in it. And then again, like I said, if it doesn't have its own, patina or stain or age color in it, you can create that just by leaving it outside. Just leave it outside in the rain, in the sun, or the wind, or the snow, or whatever, for a couple of weeks. Come back and check it out, and you'll see that it's already started to turn. And if you can't get that and you need something quicker, try using some stain underneath and paint, whatever. That's all good stuff. But then, as far as constructing the sign, you come up with however big you want it to be. If you want it to be, in this case, I think this is 2 feet across, and each board is about 4 inches thick. So 4, 4, and 4, it's about 1 foot tall, and it's about 2 feet wide. So I cut each of these boards at 2 feet. Then I went through and I measured out these 2 supports that are actually going to hold these together. All right, cut those. Then I put some glue on where they make contact with these boards. Set these boards down on top of it, and then you can either screw it in or you can nail it in. It's really going to depend on your material and how big your screws are and yada yada yada. But once you've constructed that and put it together, that's it. That's the sign. It's really simple. It's not that hard. You do have to have a few tools for it, though. You're going to have a saw, either a hand saw, which, you know, that could take you a while, or some sort of a compound miter saw, or, you know, a circular saw, which is what I use for most of these, because honestly, my signs, like these edges, how they're kind of staggered and they're not all together, that's honestly not too bad. For, you know, a lot of people's taste, they don't want the pallet signs to have nice even sides. They don't want them to look like they're well put together. You know, they want them to look like they're sort of aged and craggly, came out of somebody's old house, or, you know, they find that sign laying on the side of the road and picked it up. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just a little bit, I don't know, more obsessive over stuff like that, so I try and make mine at least a little more uniform going down the sides. But pallet signs are all about, you know, character, age, things like that. So don't worry too much about little imperfections. So anyway, I hope that helped everybody out. I've been streaming now for about 38 minutes. I really appreciate everybody that shows up for these and all the comments that I get and all the support. I'm thinking that this type of format where I'm doing sort of a live build along with some quick tips, I don't know that I'll be able to do this every week, but occasionally during the Q&A sessions that I will be doing every week, I'll mix in some stuff like that. And if you've got any ideas, feel free to shoot me those ideas. Until then, I appreciate everybody that subscribes to the channel very much. I appreciate all of you that have your notifications turned on so that you are notified when I post new material. Thanks a lot for the sharing on social media. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm on all those. I really don't mess around with Twitter very much. Facebook, definitely. All the links are right here beside me on the side of the screen. Instagram, I'm starting to get more active in that. So you can find me on there. I'll be posting pictures and quick little videos and things like that you can check out. Thanks for all the views. Thanks for all the support, all the comments coming in. They're really awesome. Be sure to click thumbs up below all the videos that you watch on my channel. That really gets them up there and helps keep me going, keeps the good feedback and the good vibes going on. So until next time, I appreciate it. Once again, I'm David Lee Roth. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys.